Nahmaduhu wa nusalli ala rasulil kareem amma ba'du. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. And welcome back to another lesson of Aqida Al Tahawiyya. Last week we'd started the first sentence of the book itself, in which Imaam Tahawi rahimahullah ta'ala said, هذا ذكر بيان عقيدة أهل السنة والجماعة. And we spent all lesson last week speaking about the word bayan, what did it encompass, and also the word aqidah, what did it actually mean. And I tried to hopefully clarify that. The next sort of phrase really is a phrase which I'm sure you've heard many a time being bandied around, and this word of Ahle Sunnah wal Jama'a. You know, we are Ahle Sunnah wal Jama'a, we are Ahle Sunnah, and everybody seems to be saying that they are Ahle Sunnah wal Jama'a. In other words, the saved sect. And how can it be that every single person is claiming that? Obviously, we accept that even though there may be slight differences when it comes to certain practices, that most of us will still fit under the broader umbrella, under the broader concept of Ahle Sunnah wal Jama'ah. We as Muslims aren't an elitist faith. We don't want to extradite, exile, remove people from our faith. We want to keep that faith open. Yes, we will find delinquents, we will find outliers, we will find individuals who like to draw attention to themselves, adopting strange positions for whatever reason, even though they'll claim that they were seeking ease for the community and the rest of it. But that doesn't necessarily mean just because we feel that their position is wayward, that we should try to remove them from the whole faith of the deen. That said, similarly, when individuals are having an influence upon the community, that person should be, as the word goes now, called out, or in terms of having positions which go contrary to this the Aqeedah itself of Ahle Sunnah wal Jama'ah. So how do we understand what the Ahle Sunnah wal Jama'ah, who the Ahle Sunnah wal Jama'ah are? Well, Ahl normally means people, individuals, Ahlul Hadith. Ahl is individuals who dedicate themselves to something, who associate themselves to something, who are connected with something. So that's the word Ahl. As for Sunnah, well, Sunnah should be fairly self-explanatory, but it's mentioned as al-ashab wal-munazimuna li-shay'. So it's wa sunnah hiya ma wurida an Rasulillahi sallallahu alayhi salatu wasalam min aqwalin wa af'alin wa taqrirat. So Ahl are those people who are associated, linked to something. Sunnah are those, is that ma wurida, and is which has been come to us, narrated from Rasulullah alayhi salatu wasalam, in terms of aqwal, statements, wa af'al, in terms of actions, wa taqrirat, in terms of tacit approval, meaning actions and words which were carried out in his presence and he did not speak against them, because it is in Nabi's practice that if he was to hear or see something which contradicted the Sharia, he would speak up about it. He would make a statement about it. It would not be permitted for him to remain quiet. He would speak, unless in certain circumstances he may adopt a certain approach. But when it comes to beliefs, then when it comes to these kind of things, he would not. So the first thing is those people who follow the Sunnah. Now the Sunnah is there. It is for all to see. It is clear. We find the Sunnah in the books of Ahadith. We find obviously the key books of Ahadith, Sahih al-Bukhari, Sahih al-Muslim, Tirmidhi, Abu Dawood, Nasai, Ibn Majah, which we can, those of us who studied at a madrasa will come under the kind of descriptor as Sihah Sitta, even though arguably that's not an absolute correct term to use, but that's what is used. But there's others as well, whether it's Bayhaqi, Daraqutni, and there's so many others, Ibn Hibban, and books that exist out there that still will hold within it the Sunnah. So that's the Sunnah. But also what we need to understand the Sunnah is more as a kind of fluid understanding of what we derive from there. So what I've just shared with you are the books which are the literal Sunnah recorded in them. But for those of us who've studied Hadith, we may find that a certain Hadith on the face of it seems to contradict another Hadith. We also find that the ahadith of different ahkam, some are considered as mutawatir, some are considered as sahih, some are gharib, some are hasan, and of various gradings that we have as well. So it's not just a really straightforward kind of book in a nice alphabetical order where we find everything about wudu, say, by the Prophet ﷺ in one book, all there, and it all just seems to go hand in glove, dove and tail, and it's just all nice and clear and whatever. It doesn't work like that. It's a science in itself, and also it's not a science that we're discussing for today. That's a science for another day. For now, we're speaking about Aqidah. So this is the Sunnah, and also we find is that was Sunnah Khulafa'i Rashidin. That is also the Sunnah of the Khulafa Rashidin. So those are the four companions radiallahu anhum ajma'in. So that would be, for instance, Sayyidina Abu Bakr radiallahu anhu, Sayyidina Umar radiallahu anhu, Sayyidina Uthman radiallahu anhu, and Sayyidina Ali radiallahu anhu. So those four as well, we find, for example, something which Sayyidina Abu Bakr radiallahu anhu did, which the Prophet of Allah sallallahu alaihi wasallam never did, and that was to bring the Qur'an together into one mushaf, into one text, in one book with a cover, so to speak. Whereas it existed, obviously, but it was all in various formats with different people, not necessarily collated together. So we wouldn't consider that to be a bid'ah. And now I introduce a new term, bid'ah. So bid'ah is an opposite, it's the antonym of sunnah. It's an innovation. And particularly bid'ah is an innovation for something where the sunnah exists. So when there is a sunnah, then to not follow that and to follow something else is a bid'ah. So if there is a sunnah way to do something, then obviously that's the way we need to adopt. But if there's a non-sunnah way, then the non-sunnah way will be called a bid'ah. There are certain things in which the Prophet of Allah ﷺ never did. So that wouldn't necessarily come under the word bid'ah. Yani, there were certain areas he never covered. So for instance, the gathering together of the mushaf, he didn't put that together in his time. But that's not something which he had said that, there's no need to gather the mushaf. Or whatever. There's no evidence to say that this was, against this. The Prophet of Allah had something against that. So let me try to give you an example of a bid'ah. So for example, when it comes to somebody who passes away, then we have ritual acts that we perform. How the body is bathed, where the body is placed, what type of prayers we do, how do we perform ta'ziyah, all those things exist. Now, if we were to start to bring something else, that we bathe the person in a different way, or we perform some other type of supplication instead of janazah, or we perform janazah differently, or we added to janazah, or we took something away, or we perform ta'ziyah differently, or we added to it, whatever, then that would obviously become a bid'ah because there is a sunnah and we avoid. But again, we digress. That again, you'll find I have a specific video on that, inshallah ta'ala, on our channel, The Only Foundation. So please look for it there. So that obviously mentions or includes that which is the sunnah. This also includes in there that which has been narrated from the Prophet of Allah sallallahu alaihi wasallam with regards to aqaid asliya and fur'iyya. So these are also have been narrated. The Prophet of Allah sallallahu alaihi wasallam also mentioned that this is what a person should believe. These are beliefs. So that's important to have. So then what we have is the Jamā. And the Jamā, the congregation, I already alluded to the four Khulafa'i Rashidin that are included within the Sunnah, but they're also, without doubt, definitely included within the Jamā. So this is the Ashabu Rasulillahi alayhi salatu wasalam, alladhina matu wa lam yukhalifu ma alayhi nabiy. Those who passed away, but they did not oppose that which the Prophet of Allah sallallahu alayhi wasallam brought. So wa Rasulu alayhi salam anhum radin, and the Prophet of Allah sallallahu alayhi wasallam was content and pleased with them. So this would then include the companions. So even though they're inferred in the first part, the four Khulafa Rashidin are inferred in the first part, they are without doubt explicitly mentioned in the second part. So anybody who claims to follow Ahle Sunnah, or claim to be rather a person of Ahle Sunnah wal Jama'a, then he must be shown to demonstrate, particularly since our discussion is on Aqaid, is to have the same beliefs as the Prophet of Allah sallallahu alaihi wasallam had, and by extension his four immediate companions, and then by further extension the companions by large, the remainder companions. And the definition was given: those who passed away and did not oppose the Prophet of Allah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and also the Prophet alayhi salatu wasalam was content with them. Key thing there, and we need to stress that now. So we all declare that we are Ahle Sunnah wal Jama'a. I use the word Ahle Sunnah because one is that this is Zikru Bayan Aqidati Ahle Sunnah, so it's already got majroor on it. But most people, those who come from the Indian subcontinent, because the Urdu language just mentions it as Ahle Sunnah with a kasra on it, it kind of naturally flows. But really, Ahlu Sunnati wal Jama'ati. So that's the position. These are who these people are. This is what they adhere to. These are the beliefs that they have, and those are the beliefs that we will find in this text. Very important to not go against what the Prophet of Allah alayhi salatu wasalam and the Sahaba radiallahu anhum ajma'in adopted. Very important. So, and you know, it can be a bit confusing. You know, I gave that, you know, I mentioned Sayyidina Abu Bakr gathering together the Musaf. But we also saw with Sayyidina Umar the fact that he gathered the men behind a single Qari for the Salatul Tarawih, which again is different. Similarly, we saw that he changed the position with regards to issuing of 3 divorces, 3 talaqs in one sitting. So even though the Prophet of Allah والسلام, considered it to be 1 talaq, Sayyidina Umar considered it to be 3 talaq. And even though there were 3 in one go. And the reason was, he said, that people were honest. So when they would make a statement, which al-batta, which also had the impact of 3, or say 3, then when asked, they would say that, oh, I only mentioned the others for emphasis. Or when I said that, I meant 1. And they would be accepted because they were people of right. Well, you know, the best of nations are those who are next to me. Khairul Quruni Qarni, Thumma Alladhina Yalunhum. That the best of nations are those who are next to me, closest to me, then those who come after, then those who come after. So therefore, they were honest, upright people. They did not fear that by making a statement that it could, you know, that they would lose their wives. If that's what they meant, then they would say it. They had no qualms about that. Honesty took precedence over everything. However, as time progressed, and as the Muslim empire grew, and it grew very quickly, you know, very, very quickly. By the time we have the likes of Sayyidina Umar, then, you know, Islam has reached as far as the Sassanid Empire in Persia, and also as far west to Philistine and beyond. So, you know, Islam has spread very, very quickly, and as a result, many converts, many people came into Islam who didn't necessarily have the same tarbiyah that had in the golden age of the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, and also those who had direct contact with the companions. So the first sort of 100,000 Sahaba and those who came after, they had the direct contact. These people were only then coming into contact with Muslims, and they may never have come into contact with a companion, or some may have come into contact with a companion. So the type of people coming in, arguably their motivation for getting in the first place was very different than those who were joining Islam very early on. So as a result, the Sayyidina Umar, realizing the situation had changed, said now that when a person issues 3 divorces in one sitting, it is considered as 3 divorces in one sitting. For us to take that context away and, you know, make up stuff and say, oh, well, we want to follow the sunnah of the Prophet Muhammad, alayhi salatu wasalam, and therefore it will all be, this is nonsense. We're just following our whims and desires. We have to follow how the Sharia was developed and how that was put in place. So that should hopefully define who the Ahle Sunnah wal Jama'a. Furthermore, we can say that this means alladhina nasaru sunnah lamaskura wattabu Jama'a, that they are those who assisted the Sunnah that's been mentioned, and they also followed the Jama'a. They followed the consensus that was established. And this is where they get their name from. And we have, for example, mentioned in Shara of a book here, and it mentions that the Prophet of Allah, the Sunnah and Jamā is that which the Prophet of Allah and his companions were upon, which is what we've already said earlier. And then there's some groups which are then removed from the Ahle Sunnah. So these are Anna Ahle Sunnah laysu mujassama. They're those who give a body to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, body in the sense of defining him. So this is what we call anthropomorphists, those who ascribe a human body to Allah. So they give him, and also you could say the mushabbah, those who do tashbih. They associate human behavior to Allah. They associate human movement, human characteristics to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And it's the image, if I'm not mistaken, on the Sistine Chapel, in which supposedly, if I get all my facts right, Leonardo da Vinci has painted, supposedly in his view, an image of God an Adam, in which the two fingers are sort of coming close together, and then the Christian narration of God created man in his form, yani in God's form. And we see a similar narration as well in the Islamic literature, and this is sometimes misinterpreted to mean that Allah created Adam alayhi salam in his form, because Adam alayhi salam is in the best of forms, and therefore so these sorts of things we have to be very careful, never mind very careful. These are anthropomorphic views to cast the human characteristics, human behaviors, human structure onto Allah. And so this makes it very clear that these are those people who are not considered as Ahle Sunnah. And they will not be included in that. And it says even that sometimes, some of those people who follow the madhab fiqhiyya, they're also not included in the Ahle Sunnah wal Jama'a. Now, it might come as a surprise to people, because this is where we got to draw our distinction between aqaid and fiqh. So fiqh is whether a person is a Hanafi, a Maliki, a Shafi'i, a Hanbali, yani they follow a particular fiqh approach. So they'll pray salah by, raising their hands once up to their earlobes, tying it below their navel, reciting thana, reciting ta'awuz, reciting tasmiyah, reciting Surah Al-Fatiha, and the various things that we do. And, they will consider their wudu to break if they vomit, whereas another madhab will say, no, your wudu doesn't break if you vomit. Some people will tie their hands here. Some people will raise their arms to their ears when they're going into other movements, whereas the Ahnaf might only do it for the salah starting. So you see all these different fiqh approaches. Now that's fiqh. That's arguably the legal side of things. Aqaid, and that is associated with a'mal. And remember, I tried to draw this distinction that you got to separate beliefs from a'mal, and that's all to do with a'mal. So you find that there were people who followed some of the former madhahib, but in beliefs they did not fall into Ahle Sunnah wal Jama'a. That's important distinction to draw, like the Tajsim and the Mu'tazila. All these people are those, and also the Karamiyya and things of that nature. So we find that, there were even those people who linked themselves in fiqh to Imam Abu Hanifa, but their aqaid was outside of that. And there were those who linked their fiqh towards Imam Ahmad ibn Hanbal, but their aqaid was outside of that. So for example, we have here that we had some people, particularly in the Hanabila madhab, who obviously were of the mujassama, yani they would give a jism to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, a body to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and this is the view of the anthropomorphic. And numerous people are mentioned here. Qadi Abi Ya'la, Ibn Qudama al-Maqdisi, Ibn Zaghuni, Ibn Taymiyyah, Ibn Qayyim al-Jawziyah, and others who did of this particular act. So even though when it came to fiqh, they were associated with Imam Ahmad ibn Hanbal rahimahullah ta'ala, but when it came to aqaid, they were very much distinct from that. But he was not alone. We have others, for example, that are of the Ahnaf madhab, that were also very similar, and that approach is taken similarly within the Shafi, but not so much, and also in the Malikiyya, but again not so much. So this is something that one needs to understand, that this exists and it's a reality. But really, I think I've maybe just got a little bit too deep there. I apologize if I have, but really I just wanted to draw the distinction historically, because I don't really want to go into the history on the development of Aqidah, because it's not really what we want to cover. For us, it's just suffice for us to understand our beliefs. One can see clearly that the A'mal and the Aqaid are separate. So that brings me to the end of what I wanted to speak of today, inshallah. Next week, if you join me, we'll speak about the kind of moving into the body of the text before we get into the more details. Jazakumullah khairan. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.